creating a world that works for everyone. It's a privilege and an honor to stand here today, and I'm grateful to be here to serve my community, my congregation, my brothers, and my sisters. I know the power of words. I know that speaking about their power can make a difference. When I was asked to speak on creating a world that works for everyone, I thought about the roles that I fulfill. I'm a rabbi, a teacher, a parent, a spouse. I work diligently for my family, for my community, for my city. And I know that to change this world is not just to make radical changes on a global scale, but to work right here in this room. To be known not just on the internet and all around the world, but to be known right here with our friends and our family, one little step at a time. And sometimes I find we know exactly what to say 5 minutes later. I want to share a story from a few days ago. I, like many people, have said, I really need to work on getting healthy. I need to exercise. So a few months ago, with that start of that pandemic, I joined the line outside the bicycle store and I got a bicycle. And I've been trying to bike and trying to get other people to go biking with me, trying to get other clergy to go biking with me, trying to get friends to go biking with me, trying to get my congregants to go biking with me. So Reverend J.C. Pritchett and I took a bike ride a couple weeks ago. And we started and ended in my parking lot at Congregation B'nai Israel on 58th Street North and 4th Avenue. And we went for the ride, we went down the trail, we came back. And we drove across 1st Avenue South, we drove across Central Avenue, we drove across 1st Avenue North, and we just made it to 62nd Street. And a car pulls up, so it's a residential street, we sort of each go our separate ways to the other side and make sure there's plenty of room. And the lady driving the car rolls down her passenger side window and starts talking to me. She wants directions for how to get to Pasadena Avenue, just around the corner. Nothing seems strange about the story except that Reverend J.C. Pritchett has lived in this city his entire life. I've lived in this city for just about 3 years. I have made it my home, and I didn't know the answer to the question. But his knowledge of geography of the area, the history of the city, is so much greater than mine. But there's one defining factor that this older woman saw: the color of our skin. Now, to be fair, there wasn't a whole lot of skin because we're both wearing our masks and our glasses but you could tell that I'm a little bit paler than he is. And the driver's skin was also rather pale. Now, I can't get into her head. I don't know what she was thinking, but she could have just as easily rolled down the other window and asked the Reverend J.C. Pritchett. But she didn't. She asked me. Could I have erased her casual racism with one word? Probably not. Was it worth reflecting her choice back upon her? It could have been. And I have to say, for me, change happens one-on-one. It happens through building relationships. If this was the first time that I had a conversation with the Reverend J.C. Pritchett, we likely wouldn't have even discussed the moment. It would have gone right by because it was that elephant in the room we don't want to talk about. We might have ignored it and gone on our way. But instead, we had a conversation for the rest of the few minutes back about what happened there. We spoke about when we engage and when we don't, when we speak up and when we stay silent. Now, as a rabbi, my training is not only about relationships, it's about text. And I want to share from you a foundational text that's shared by so many of us. I want to read from the very opening of the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis. And the opening of our Holy Torah, that some of you call the Holy Bible, and the story is quite the same in the book of the Quran, tells us of the power of speech. It tells us of the power that words have to create and destroy. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, when God began to create the heavens and the earth. V'haaretz hayta tohu ovohu, the earth was unformed and void, and it seems right now there's far too much unformed and void in this world. V'choshek al panei tchum, and there was darkness over the surface, and there's a lot of darkness right now. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim, but over that darkness and over that unformed void came the Spirit of God. And God answers Vayomer Elohim yehi or. And God said, let there be light. Vayhi or. And there was light. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov. God saw that the light was good. Vayavdel Elohim ben haor ben hachoshek. And God separated that light from darkness. Vayikra Elohim laor yom. And God called that light day. Velachoshek kara laila. And the darkness God called light. Vayerev vayiboker yom echad. There was evening, there was morning, the first day. In just a few words, and in the Hebrew even fewer than in the English, light came to be. In just a few words, we come to be. And while our words may not create the universe, they create the universe that is around us. They create or destroy the universe of people that we love, the people that walk around us. They create or destroy friendships, family relationships, and so much more. And as a rabbi, I look at these words and I think about the legacy of speech. My tradition has been arguing about speech for generations. And I know that discussions and disagreements can connect us to the Holy One. If we study together, we can see multiple perspectives of that same text, find deeper meanings, reveal hidden truths. My tradition speaks of machloket l'shem shamayim, arguments for the sake of heaven. Arguments that respect the humanity of one another, lift us up, and push us to truth. So if we want to create a world that works for everyone, we have to work towards truth. If we want to create a world that works for everyone, you have to see the humanity in one another. We cannot forget the soul of the person standing right in front of us. We can't forget the power of the words that comes out of our mouths. But we live in a world where disagreement has become violent, where our words are weaponized. And some might say this is new, but Ecclesiastes teaches us, Ein kol chadash tachat hashemes. There's nothing new under the sun. And in preparing for today, I apparently took the advice of Reverend Rabbi, and that I also looked at some of the sermons of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And in 1956, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in the city of New York, he preached the death of evil upon the seashore. And there, like so many times before and since, he used the story of the Exodus from Egypt to connect his story to mine. He showed us that while we may share different stories, ultimately, they're intertwined. So in his words, he said, in our own struggle for freedom and justice in this country, we have gradually seen the death of evil. Many years ago, the Negro was thrown into the Egypt of segregation, and his great struggle has been to free himself from the crippling restrictions and the paralyzing effects of this vicious system. For years, it looked like he would never get out of this Egypt. The closed Red Sea always stood before him with discouraging dimensions. There were always those pharaohs with hardened hearts who, despite the cries of many a Moses refused to let these people go. But one day, through a world-shaking decree by the 9 justices of the Supreme Court of America and an awakened moral conscience of many white persons of goodwill, backed up by the providence of God, the Red Sea was opened, and the forces of justice marched through to the other side. As we look back, he wrote, we see segregation caught in the rushing waters of historical necessity. Evil in the form of injustice and exploitation cannot survive. There is a Red Sea in history that ultimately comes to carry the forces of goodness to victory, and that same Red Sea closes in to bring doom and destruction to the forces of evil. Now, if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was standing here before us today, he could have given the exact same sermon. As we heard, between the civil rights movement and Black Lives Matter, much has changed and too much has stayed the same. And now, I've lived in this city for 3 years. And as I started biking the city, I'm starting to see parts of the city I never saw before, because I didn't have any need to go there until I have a relationship that brings me there. Otherwise, it's just another street, another place. Martin Luther King showed the great passion to change this world for the better, connecting with the humanity in each and every person, even with those that he had significant disagreements. And near the end of that speech in 1956, he said, "Let us remember that as we struggle against Egypt, we have to have love and compassion and understanding, goodwill for those against whom we struggle, helping them to realize that as we seek to defeat the evils of Egypt, we're not seeking to defeat them, but to help them as well as ourselves." So I want to share a story that I didn't write down here, a story from the Talmud, from a Jewish collection of wisdom, a story about Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir had a very wise wife named Bruria. And Rabbi Meir had a problem. There were these guys in the market that every time he went through, even though he was this great scholar and deserving of respect, they were obnoxious to him. And they were mean, and they were causing trouble, not just with him, but for many other people. And he starts to pray for their destruction. And his wife knows that his prayers are quite powerful, and that if God hears his prayers, it may lead to their destruction. And she says, no, my husband, do not pray for their destruction. Pray for the destruction of the evil that is within them. Pray for the destruction of the evil that is within them. And he did, and it worked, and they were evil no more. Now, if only we could pray the evil away for all out there. We're trying, but we got a lot of work to do, and we need some truth and some help with that. So I want to share another few words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. This was a different decade, a different time, April 4th, 1967. And he was standing with one of my teachers of blessed memory, the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was standing in the magnificent Riverside Church, which I've been blessed to stand inside. And his message, though, was one that was a lot more controversial. If you thought civil rights was controversial, when he started to talk about the Vietnam War, he had a lot more trouble. He was speaking against the Vietnam War. And that message, even in New York City, was not so well received outside the walls of those churches. He spoke out against our government sending mostly black and brown troops to fight against people of color halfway around the world. He shared, though, in his speech that he was not anti-American. He loved our country dearly. He was a patriot, he said, and he wanted our country to be better, to lift up all of her citizens, to unite them to do good here, rather than to do something that didn't seem so good so far away. And he spoke again about the power of love. And again, in a very particular form, Reverend Rabbi, we were on the same wavelength today. And he said, "When I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm not speaking of that force which is just emotional bosh. I'm speaking of the force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door to that ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. How many times does the rabbi quote John? I'm quoting Reverend Martin Luther King, quoting John. Let us love one another, for love is God. And every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. If we love one another, God dwells in us, and God's love is perfected in us." And he wrote, "Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day." And this is the most important line from the way I hear it. We can no longer afford, this is 1967, but it could be 2021. We can no longer afford to worship the God of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. And history is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals that pursued this self-defeating path of hate. I feel those words. Those words resonate in 2021. As we look towards our future as Americans, as we look to our future as citizens of the state of Florida, as we look to our future as citizens in this great city of St. Petersburg, how can we lift up that message? How can we recognize that the words that come out of our mouth in pursuit of truth can also be in pursuit of that greater love. When we speak to one another, are we sharing words of light or darkness? We can lift each other up, or we can push each other down. We can share that love to build a world that is for everyone. So today, as we reflect on this legacy of an imperfect man, just like we are all imperfect human beings, an imperfect man who managed to truly change the world, not just in his neighborhood. I have no goal or desire to change the entire world. I just want to make my community, my city, a little bit better. But his goals were much bigger, and he managed to achieve them, not overnight, not in a day or a week, but over years. And we all loved him so much more when he was no longer causing trouble by saying more words. If he continued that fight, he might have been called a lot more names. And that's the challenge. So as we reflect on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his leadership was in seeing how to bring that light through the power of words into this world. In a time of darkness, he chose nonviolence. He chose a path of peace, but this was not a quiet peace. It was not accepting the status quo that said that a man of color was less than a man of paler skin. It was a loud peace, demanding righteousness and demanding justice. And today there are so many who call for the acceptance of what has been, but bringing light into this world sometimes illuminates the challenges in those dark corners. Bringing light into this world shows us that there are more challenges to overcome. So as I make this reflection, I think of the importance of that still small voice, the legacy of the Hebrew prophets, and the demand to live a life of righteousness. And so let us light those lamps. Let us work towards justice. Let us pray for a real, a true, a lasting peace, one that builds a better future for us all. Let us use our words to make this world just a little bit better. Let us use our words to make a world that works for everyone. Thank you.